It is absolutely amazing how many questions I get on a daily basis regarding the subject of Islam. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today you are about to watch some pretty incredible stuff that's going to answer a lot of those questions. And we're about to bring truth to the many lies that are being told about what's happening in the Middle East. Prepare yourselves, everybody. This interview is going to be mind-blowing. All right, let's get into it, guys. This one is going to be awesome. You are going to love this video because I have with me Robert Spencer from Jihad Watch. Now, he is an absolute wealth of information. I can tell you this right now. He knows more than most about what is going on in Islam, and he covers a ton. And when I say a ton of stories dealing with things that are happening all over the world related to exactly this topic. So if you want more information on Islam, this is the guy right here to be watching, and you want to watch him on this show because you are about to learn a lot. So Robert, I'm honored you're here with us. You are such a blessing. And I was just hoping that maybe we could start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself. And I know that what we're about to get into is going to be awesome. So have at it, my dear brother. Looking forward to this.
Well, thanks, James. First off, it's very kind of you to have me on, and I appreciate it. It's good to talk to you, and I admire your work as well. And in any case, thank you for all your kind words. I am, as you noted, director of Jihad Watch, which is at jihadwatch.org. It is the only site, as far as I know, that tracks jihad activity in the United States and around the world every day. We are covering, of course, in a very major way, the jihad against Israel now since October 7th, but that is not all that we cover. We try to pay as much attention as we can to the jihad that is going on in West Africa, to the jihad attacks that we frequently see in Europe that aren't reported for the most part, and many, many others all around the world. I'm also the author of 27 books, including The Critical Quran, which is a new translation, plus commentary on the Quran, honest translation and commentary that show what Muslims actually believe about the Quran as opposed to what they tell non-Muslims in the West. Also, the history of jihad, which is the only history of jihad that I know of that covers the jihad all over the world for 1,400 years, and The Palestinian Delusion, which is a book about this present conflict. Although I wrote it 4 years ago, it's unfortunately newly relevant in light of the breaking news today.
Not strangely, but uniquely prophetic in many ways. I mean, a lot of the things that you say there are the obvious, right? If you understand and know what Islam is all about. But it is amazing. And perhaps one of the things that has been bothering me lately is founded in a couple of areas. Lately, we've been bombarded, and I'm hoping maybe we could talk about this for a second. We've been bombarded by a lot of people who say that we can take the Quran and we can preach the gospel using the Quran. I'm hearing a lot of that beginning to be said. People are talking about really, they're conflating Jesus with Muhammad or Jesus with Allah. The Muhammad one is kind of a new one that I have not heard in quite some time, but I've been astounded by some of the statements that I've been hearing people say, and it doesn't surprise me. And I'll just start by reading something from the Quran, and then maybe you responding to it. It's a passage that a lot of people don't know about, and quite frankly, actually the surah, and a lot of people don't know about it. Because it's obviously not discussed, but it says this in Arabic. It says, "Wa makru wa makara Allahu wa Allahu khayra al makarina," which basically refers to what they call the Jews deceiving. And so it says Allah deceived because Allah is the chief of deceivers. And it's interesting because when the Quran actually tells you, or a holy book associated with the religion of Islam tells you that Allah, their God, is the chief of deceivers, I don't know how much you can rest in. I just really don't know. And I think it's a good leadway into what's happening right now in Gaza, especially because there are a lot of lies being told about Israel. There's a lot of lies being told about what's happening in this conflict. And I'm hoping that maybe you could talk about a lot of that.
Yeah, see, what people don't realize about that passage is not only that it says that Allah is the chief of deceivers which calls into question who exactly Allah is in connection with what we know, for example, about what Jesus said, that the devil is the father of lies. And so, if Allah is the chief of deceivers, isn't Allah telling us that he is the father of lies right there? And that would stand to reason, given the fact that the Quran is a book that I think is the perfect embodiment of the prophet Isaiah's words, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, as well
Yes.
as the perfect embodiment of the Lord's words again, where he says, the time will come when men will kill you and think that they're offering service to God. So what if Satan is disguising himself as an angel of light, and so he is posing as the supreme God in the Quran and saying that he is the chief of deceivers, as giving us a clue as to who he really is, then he's telling them that it's an act of righteousness and it's good to kill people and to lie. Well, then it seems to me to all fit together. But it's
Yeah.
also exemplary. If Allah is the chief of deceivers, then the followers of Allah should also be deceivers. And so we see it also in Muhammad's words, as attributed to him in the famous hadith, war is deceit. And he allows for lying between a husband and a wife and in wartime. So that, I think, both of those facts have to be understood as the foundation of what we're seeing out of Gaza. For example, we see all the American news services, all the international news services, Associated Press, Reuters, and then CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post, and they're repeating every day we see it. 10,000 civilians killed in Gaza, 11,000, 12,000. I think it's up to 14,000 civilians killed in Gaza. And to the person who's uninformed, it sounds terrible. You have 1,400 Israelis killed and 14,000 Gazans. It seems to bear out what the governments of the world are saying, that Israel is engaging in a disproportionate response that is far worse than what Hamas did. And so any decent person has to repudiate Israel and oppose its action in Gaza. And then you have the president of the United States saying, we just want a humanitarian pause. And it all sounds so loving and so good, that these are the people who are really the forces of good in the world. But then you have to ask, well, who's exactly the source of this figure? Who says 14,000 civilians were killed in Gaza? And then you hear, oh, it was the Gaza Ministry of Health. Who runs the Gaza Ministry of Health? Hamas. What is Hamas? The Islamic resistance movement. And what is the Islamic resistance movement? But in its charter, it says Israel will arise and will continue until Islam obliterates it. So, how is Islam going to obliterate it? By force of arms is one way, but also by deceit. Because if it's going to be defeated in an Islamic way, you see, then that would be imitating Allah and Muhammad, and that would be deceiving. So we should only expect Hamas to lie. And the news services are just repeating what Hamas says uncritically because they hate Israel too. They don't want even to look into this possibility. But the governments of the United States, the governments of the European Union, and the United Nations especially should not shy away from this question and say, are we being deceived here? Are they lying to us? Isn't it likely that they're lying to us, since they think lying is a holy act? And since they are avowedly working from Islamic principles that say that lying is a holy act.
Hmm.
And so, where does that leave us but to assume, if we're going to be responsible about this, that Hamas is lying? They've also been proven to be lying. They said Israel hit the Al Ahli hospital in Gaza and killed 500 civilians. And then it turned out, well, actually, it was Palestinian Islamic Jihad firing an errant rocket that hit the hospital. And only 10 people were killed. And it wasn't the hospital at all that was hit, it was the parking lot of the hospital. And
Hmm.
so we all have recent evidence that Hamas lies, and yet the news services still take them seriously. This is inexcusable.
It's amazing to me because speaking Arabic, one of the things that I have a very additional advantage with is I listen to stations like Al Jazeera, and I listen to a lot of the things that are being said in Arabic. And oftentimes, the things that are spoken in Arabic are not correctly translated into English. For example, the passage that I just quoted to you is oftentimes quoted as planning instead of deceiving, which anybody who speaks the Arabic language knows that that's a completely absurd assertion, right? There's no way in the world that it's translated like that. It's like saying the word black really means red, and somehow it is. They're completely the same, and it's absolutely terrible. I wanted to get your reaction to this because this creates a conundrum for us. I want to play the first portion of Antonio Guterres addressing the United Nations. And I just have to say this, in all fairness, I have a certain level of disdain for this individual for a lot of reasons. But amongst one of them happens to be a very clear hatred for Jews through the terminology that he deploys, as well as the fact that he clearly has no understanding of the real problem with the Palestinian population, especially in Gaza. One thing a lot of people don't know is that my mom was a missionary in Gaza for many, many years when Egypt had possession of Gaza. And so many of the things that my mom tells me about the way of life back then is so different from many of the things that we're understanding in the media to be today, especially prior to 2006. But I want to play this for you, and I really want you to react. I'm only going to play the first couple of minutes, but I've been longing to hear your reaction to this ever since
Okay.
I heard him talk about it. So let me just play this. This is again Antonio Guterres, and get ready. It's not pleasant. Here we go.
Excellencies, the situation in the Middle East is growing more dire by the hour. The war in Gaza is raging and risks spiraling throughout the region. Divisions are splintering societies, tensions threaten to boil over. At a crucial moment like this, it is vital to be clear on principles, starting with the fundamental principle of respecting and protecting civilians. I have condemned unequivocally the horrifying and unprecedented 7 October acts of terror by Hamas in Israel. Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring, and kidnapping of civilians or the launching of rockets against civilian targets. All hostages must be treated humanely and released immediately and without conditions. And I respectfully note the presence among us of members of their families. Excellencies, it is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation.
I'll cut it off right there because I think the rhetoric is going to continue in ways that are uniquely inflammatory. But
Indeed.
what would you say to that, especially the suffocating occupation, not in a vacuum? I think that's worthy of a response.
Yeah, well, of course, none of it is true. There is no occupation. And unfortunately, the Israelis themselves, I think, do not make this point often enough or clearly enough. And sometimes they have even dealt with entities that claim that they are engaging in an illegal occupation in a way that legitimizes or threatens to legitimize this kind of idea. But there's no basis to it. On the basis of international law, who owns that land? Most people who say that Israel occupies territory would say, well, that's Palestinian land. On what basis is it Palestinian land? There is no Palestinian state that has ever existed on that land. And so how can anybody say that that it's Palestinian land? The Ottoman Empire is the last state to own that land, and the Ottoman Empire ceded control of it after World War One to the British, to the League of Nations. And the League of Nations granted it to the British as the mandate for Palestine, which was specifically designed to be the basis for the creation of a Jewish national home. So the British immediately gave two-thirds of it to the Arabs for another Arab state, which is Jordan. but the rest of it was still set aside for a Jewish national home. That Jewish national home is the state of Israel. That part of the territory, the mandate for Palestine, contained Gaza and the West Bank. And so Gaza and the West Bank are legitimately only by international law Israeli territory. Now, Israel did agree to allow for the establishment of a Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank in the Oslo Accords in the 90s, but that state has never yet been established. And so it is false to say that this is illegally occupied Palestinian territory. There is no Palestinian territory as such. Israel may cede territory for a Palestinian state, but that has not happened. And so the idea of an occupation, much less a suffocating occupation, that there's nothing to that. And the idea that, what was the other thing that he said?
He talked about the actions of Hamas not being in a vacuum. In essence,
Yes,
he's
yes.
implying the fact that it was justifiable behavior.
Well, see, look, that's another thing. When you talk specifically about Gaza, it's even more ridiculous to talk about a suffocating occupation because there's no occupation since 2005.
Yeah.
The Israelis not only left the military in terms of the military that was there, but the Israelis rooted all the settlers, the Israelis who had settled in Gaza. There were Israelis who had made their homes in Gaza after the 6 Day War, when the territory of Gaza and the West Bank was won back from Egypt in terms of Gaza and Jordan in terms of the West Bank after they lost the war. Now, see, this is a principle that's allowed for every country in the world except Israel, that if somebody starts a war against you and you beat them, then you can take some of their territory as a matter of security against future wars of this kind. This is a universally recognized principle throughout human history. Look at Germany before World War II on any map and Germany after World War II. Why is Germany smaller? Because they started World War II. And so a great deal of German territory was taken away and given to Poland, to the Soviet Union, and to France. And nobody is going around saying Poland should end its illegal occupation of German territory and give the Germans back their territory. That would be ridiculous. Everybody understands that Poland can take that territory because they won the war that was illegally started against them by the Germans. Now, Egypt and Jordan made war against Israel in a likewise aggressive, unjustified war, and they lost. So Israel took Gaza, people moved in there, and they were forcibly uprooted by the Israeli government. The Israeli government went and made those Israelis move, and some of them were clinging to the land and wanting to stay. They'd been there for decades, and they were forced to leave. Okay, so there's not been a single Israeli in Gaza since 2005. And now he's talking about an illegal occupation. Where is it? Is Israel so fiendish? You know, we hear all these Zionist conspiracy stories. Are the Zionists so clever, so demonically powerful that they can occupy a territory without having anybody there? It's ridiculous
Yeah.
on its face. And so Antonio Guterres has to be more responsible. He's the Secretary General of the United Nations. He should not be speaking in a way that is endangering a member state by lying. But that's what he's doing.
Yeah, and he's doing it quite effectively because he has led a coalition of representative nations that for whatever reason are jumping on a bandwagon in order to make a declaration that the state of Israel is behaving nefariously in some way, when in reality what appears to be the real case is that any real Arab that's ever lived in Israel that has decided to, for lack of a better term, be an Israeli citizen or function within the confines of what is Israeli law have actually made wonderful lives for themselves. They've become millionaires. Little quick statement or a quick story. I spent some time with two Palestinian pastors, one from Beit Lahem and the other one from Ramlah. And both of them were in my church. Joe Rosenberg had asked me to host them. And I got behind closed doors with them and started talking. We're not talking English. We're talking Arabic. We're just letting our hair down. We're having a conversation. And they admitted to me that one of their greatest frustrations is anytime a Palestinian that they reach out to converts from Islam into Christianity, the biggest frustration that they have is that they do not stay anywhere near Judea or Samaria, that they, in essence, choose to leave that area and go live in an Israeli village because they admittedly will live a better life. And they're not objecting to the fact that they're going to live a better life. They're just objecting to the fact that they need more people helping to preach the gospel
Mhm.
in that area. So that's about as raw as it gets. And I think that it's important that we understand that, because everybody is saying, a lot of people are saying, not everybody, a lot of people are saying that the Israelis are occupiers. And what particularly scares me about this, and you tell me your thoughts on this, is the fact that look, it's one thing if people tell me destruction to the state of Israel. Okay, look, I'm first generation born into this country from Egyptian parents. Okay, so I'm about as close to it as it gets. But when they say death to the state of Israel, that's one thing. Okay, but they're not saying that. They're saying death to the Jews. So, what inspires this? I want to hear it from your mouth. You're very articulate in this respect. I've been talking about it a lot, but I think it would be good for you to outline this a little bit, because a lot of people are, and this is where I'm going with this. A lot of people tell me, we eliminate Hamas, and then we're not going to have this problem anymore. There's going to be peace, and Hezbollah will back down, and then everybody else will. There won't be any more intifadas, and it's everything's going to be okay. Um, can you help us with this?
I really wish that were true, but unfortunately, it's just more wishful thinking. There seems to be so much wishful thinking and fantasy in connection with this issue, and that's just another example of it. Unfortunately, there was recently a survey in Gaza, and 57% of the people said they had a favorable view of Hamas. And a lot of people were encouraged by that. They said, oh, see, that's down from before, because they won 70% of the vote in the election in 2000, what was it, 2005 or 6?
Yeah,
So anyway,
2006. Yeah,
the problem was that the two groups that were more popular than Hamas were Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Lion's Den, which are even more virulent and more violent than Hamas is. And so it's not going to, if Hamas goes away, which it should, if Hamas is destroyed, which it should be, then unfortunately this will not ultimately solve the problem. It'll help, but it will not solve the problem. The problem comes from Islamic teaching. And nobody wants to face that, because you've got 1.8 billion Muslims, although we are not counting in that, we are including in that all the Muslims who have actually secretly left Islam, but don't say so because they know about the death penalty for people who
yeah,
leave Islam. And so there is a very large likelihood that the number of actual serious Muslims is much smaller than that. But in any case, that's the number that's thrown around. And the nobody wants to confront the fact that the problem could be so large, but it is, and we don't really gain anything by pretending that it isn't. The famous hadith that's most important for this right now is Muhammad saying that their end times will not come until Muslims kill Jews and the Jews hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees cry out, "Oh Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." Now, see, a lot of people say, well, that's just about the end times, so we don't have to worry about that now. Well, the fact is that it says the end times will not come until Muslims kill
until
Jews. So a
yeah,
Muslim can consider that he's doing a holy act, a sacred act of service to Allah by killing Jews that will help bring about the end times and the final victory of the Muslims. And so he might think that it's a wonderful thing to go and kill Jews to hasten the last hour and make sure that he is living while the great victory of Islam is finally fulfilled. And so that is a very dangerous statement that justifies the killing of Jews. Then you have the Quran saying that the Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims in chapter 5, verse 82. The thrice repeated, kill them wherever you find them. The various other passages that call for the killing and subjugation of non Muslims. This creates a very dangerous idea that you are serving God, like I said, like the Lord Jesus said, that you're serving God by killing, and particularly by killing Jews. And so that's a very powerful thing for people to be deluded into thinking. And it's not going to be solved by some kind of an agreement or negotiations or a Palestinian state or anything. because they believe that it's a command of Allah.
It's heavy. You know, my dad and my brother were in Egypt visiting on 9/11 when that actually took place. And when it did take place, it was approaching the evening time in Egypt. And they were getting ready to wind down and get some rest and were awakened by many people. By the way, this is in what we would call Masri Jadida. This is Cairo. They were awakened by people in the streets handing candy to each other and celebrating when they heard the news of bin Laden and what actually happened there. What's even more interesting is a lot of people, even back then as they do now, continue to say that as long as these attacks and all of these things are happening overseas, then we're not going to be affected. And I tell you what particularly affected me, which wouldn't necessarily affect the average person, but I remembered many, many days later, I want to say 4 or 5 days later after 9/11 had taken place, I was working very late nights because at the time I was a police chaplain and there were not a lot of federal agents that were speaking a lot of Arabic at the time. So I was meeting with all kinds of people. And I remember coming home on the 710 freeway and I was listening to KNX 1070, which here in Southern California is a news radio station. And they said there was a disruption. It was around 5 o'clock in the morning. They said, we interrupt this news broadcast for I forgot exactly what they called it, but it was some kind of a public service announcement. And then I began to hear Yallah Yallah Muhammad Rasulullah being said, as well as that was actually after they said Salatu khairan min al-nawm, Allahu Akbar Muhammad Rasulullah. So it's better to pray than to sleep. And basically, what I was listening to was a prayer call over a radio station that is publicly funded, okay, by the taxpayers of the United States of America. So here's the question: how much of this is going to eventually affect us, and has it already? And should we be concerned?
Well, it has affected us because, of course, you're talking about 9/11, and people might not realize. I think it's really a shame that people don't realize all these years later, but they don't, that Hamas and Al Qaeda have exactly the same belief system, the same ideology, the same motives, the same goals, the same point of view in every way. And so to pretend that we are not all in this fight together, it's dangerous. We should be joining together with all the groups and states that are threatened by jihad. But of course, that's not happening. And you have the Biden administration trying to pressure Israel to go easy when it should be telling them to be even tougher. But in any case, the fact is that we face the same jihad, we face the same difficulties, the same challenges, and the people who are running the administration and the government of the United States not only do not know that, but uh, they consider those who say such things to be Islamophobic bigots. And the one of the things that happened since October 7th was that the Biden regime started a national strategy to counter Islamophobia,
Yeah.
which will likely result in the silencing of people who speak honestly about the nature and magnitude of the jihad threat.
Which the person that they put in charge of that is a very, or believed to be, or understood to be a very devout Muslim that has ties to family members that are associated with terrorist organizations. So, matter of fact, there are members of the State Department that work with Blinken that actually are sympathizers of people who come from that background because they themselves affiliate with them or either have family members that are, which is terribly disturbing when you think about it. And so I think that brings me to the next area, and that is the contributions that our current regime in office has made in order to enable all of this. I saw a speech by Ibrahim Raisi, which I wish I didn't waste my time watching, but he basically spoke about Islamophobia, and he actually defined Islamophobia as being a cultural type of apartheid. That's the term he used, cultural apartheid. That's what he used, and he said that an example of cultural apartheid is not being able to allow girls in their schools to wear hijabs. It's crazy, and he basically implied that those are worthy of death. Of course, as we know in Sharia law, speaks of those things. Can you address that for a little bit?
Yeah, guys like Raisi, they know how to play the left like a fiddle. They know how to manipulate the Western left using all their favorite language and all the ways that they think. And so to say that Islamophobia is cultural apartheid is masterful propaganda, because it makes leftists who are uninformed about these issues, which is virtually all of them, think that they must not oppose jihad, they must not oppose Hamas, they must not oppose the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that to do so would be to align themselves with the forces of racism and bigotry and all the things that they fear and hate the most. And so Raisi is trying to rally the Western left onto his side. He's been very successful at that. It was only a matter of poor timing and a mistake in calculation that $6 billion didn't go to Iran to fund all this from the United States. Actually, in unfrozen funds, but funds that have been frozen for decades, that the Biden regime was about to deliver to Iran when October 7th hit. And I think, to the surprise, the unpleasant surprise of Raisi and the Ayatollah Khamenei, the Biden regime actually held up the funds, or told Qatar, where they had been delivered already, to hold them up. And so we'll see. Qatar, of course, is no real friend of the United States, may have already delivered them without uh, making it public, or may do so sometime in the future. But as far as we know right now, the $6 billion has not been delivered. But Biden did give 148 million to Gaza in the run up to the October 7th attack, and then went over to Israel to declare his solidarity with Israel. And standing there with Benjamin Netanyahu, he said, "Oh, and I'm giving another 100 million to Gaza for humanitarian purposes." Now, he said, "Now, if Hamas gets this, I'm going to be very angry." Well, yeah, he's going to be angry, because the fact is that
Mhm.
there's no entity in Gaza that can get that except Hamas. And if somebody is chosen to receive the 100 million from the United States, then Hamas is going to knock on their door the next day. And there's no way that they can stop Hamas from getting that money. There's no entity in Gaza that can stand up to Hamas, except maybe the other jihad groups. And so that money is going for the jihad against Israel. And
Mm.
Biden, if Biden doesn't know it, his handlers must. Netanyahu must know it. And he shows that he's not really on the side of Israel at all. And it was incredibly irresponsible for him to have done that, but it shows his true colors.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, and I think that it's terrible, because the problem that that has created for a lot of people is a conundrum in which the person who is verbally condemning it is also the person who's enabling them. A fact that a lot of people don't know, certainly you do know this, centers around the idea that when we start looking at the picture of what's going on right now, even with Qatar, three at least that we know of, three of Hamas's top leaders right now are being housed and living in Qatar. Their combined net worth amongst these three is roughly estimated to be $12 billion. And Qatar seems to be just very openly protecting them and allowing them to be able to do the things that they're doing. And I think for every American, that should be of grave concern. I think that that's worth talking about, because these people are not in Gaza fighting the good fight, as they would call it, right? They're in Qatar enjoying the corrupt money that's being given to them and behaving in a way that is absolutely reprehensible.
Yeah, James, it reminds me of the hadith of Muhammad where he says, "If I could, I would be martyred and then come back and fight and be martyred again and come back and fight and be martyred again." And of course, it's easy for the guy way back uh, behind the front lines to say that. And it's the same thing with these Hamas leaders, watching the massacres unfold safely in their plush office in Qatar, and then kneeling down and praying and thanking Allah for the great victory. And you're right, they're all billionaires, and those billions are American taxpayer dollars that were supposed to go for the well-being of the Palestinians, and they skimmed off a huge amount for themselves off the top, and now they're living comfortably, courtesy of one of the world's foremost sponsors of the Muslim Brotherhood, that also, of course, has very deeply infiltrated the Biden regime. And so it's clear in the first place, they don't care anything about their own people. They're just using them to enrich themselves. They are enriching themselves at the expense of American taxpayers. And the American regime is so compromised by their allies from the Muslim Brotherhood that nothing is going to be done.
On that note, I have to show you a graphic. This was given to us by the IDF, I want to say a week and a half ago. It's powerfully impacting, and it's undoubtedly legitimate. Okay, this is an amazing picture. I'm going to explain this to you. This is a picture that depicts failed rocket launches. Now, the dark dots that you see are positions that Hamas has actually set up their rockets, and the lighter dots are impact sites of the failed rocket launches. And it's interesting because as of the 21st of October, there were 5,600 rocket launches in Gaza, 550 estimated to be ones that damaged lives and property and people still within Gaza. But that's not the reason why I'm showing you this. There's one aspect of this that I think is really critical to point. If you look to the south and the border of Gaza against Egypt, you'll notice a series of organized positions there on the southern border, rocket positions that they put right there on the border. And it's unique to me because those rockets are the most active rockets right now in Gaza that have been launched, those rocket positions. They keep setting them up and firing them. And my understanding is that the reason why those rocket positions are staying there and not moving is because they're hoping to draw retaliatory fire from Israel with the hope that it may end up destroying a part of the Egyptian border and not necessarily the Gaza border. To that, can you talk about this tactic a little bit? And then there's another thing I wanted to talk about with respect to Palestinian refugees. But can you talk about this for just a minute?
Yeah, the idea would be to draw Egypt into the war, which the Gazans, the Hamas, would very much like, because, of course, that would also make it incumbent upon the other Arab states as well as the Muslim non-Arab states to join in Islamic solidarity. And so, what they would like to see is 56 Arab countries fighting against Israel. And
Yeah.
then they believe that Israel would be obliterated altogether. And so they are hoping that Israel will fire upon those rocket launchers and hit Egypt, and that Egypt will declare war in response.
Okay, and then here's another conundrum that I have, and I share this all the time with people. Okay, 22 Arab nations. We have, I want to say 40, and I don't know if that's the exact number, but it's around 40 Muslim nations. Some of them obviously not Arab. Okay, um, not a single one of them will accept Palestinian refugees. Not a single one. Can you talk about that a little bit, especially with the understanding that Israel is taking in Palestinians and helping them as much as possible? Many of the lives being lost, by the way, by the IDF are being lost protecting Palestinian lives. That's a whole other issue. But can we talk about that?
Well, in the first place, we have to remember that the Palestinian nationality was invented in 1964 by
Yeah.
the KGB and Yasser Arafat. There were no Palestinians before that. You can search all through human history, and while you'll find Palestine as a region, you will not find the Palestinians as a people. They were never mentioned in 1948 when Israel was created. It was all Israel versus the Arabs. They were never mentioned among the nationalities that made up the Ottoman Empire. Never mentioned anywhere. And so, in the first place, we have to recognize that the Palestinians, as we know them today, are actually Levantine Arabs who are not any different culturally, linguistically, or religiously, for the most part, from the Lebanese, the Syrians, and the Jordanians. They're a little different, as you know, from the Egyptians, but not severely different. But
No.
it's a different Arabic dialect and so on. And so, there is no reason why the Lebanese, Jordanians, and Syrians could not have taken in all those people who were displaced in 1948, and there would be no problem today at all. And you might say, well, they couldn't because it's not their home. Their home is in Haifa or Tel Aviv or wherever. Well, that's a shame insofar as it's true. There are a lot of lying claims nowadays, of course, but also it has to be remembered that the Arab League told the Arabs in the region that became the state of Israel to leave because they thought Israel was going to be crushed in 1948, and then they could go right back. It didn't turn out that way. The Arab states lost. So the Arabs who left at the behest of the Arab League, they never went back. But anyway, the refugees, insofar as there were any refugees in 1948, why couldn't they settle in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan? There were millions of refugees in Germany after World War II. I mean, in Europe after World War II. Germans, Poles, Austrians, Hungarians, Czechs, millions, literally millions of people displaced. And the borders were adjusted such that millions of those people could not return to their homes. And they went somewhere else and made a new life. And nobody calls them refugees today. In
Yeah.
India, there was the partition of India after World War II, and millions of people were displaced and never could return to their homes. And there was violence, and ultimately it was settled, and people built new homes and made a new life. Only the Palestinians continue to be refugees and are not allowed even among the other Arab countries there. Why? Because the Arab countries want to keep the Palestinian issue alive as a weapon against Israel in order to destroy Israel in the future. And the United Nations has abetted this in a criminal manner by extending refugee status not just to the people who actually left in 1948, but to their children and grandchildren. You know, my grandparents were exiled from the Ottoman Empire for refusing to convert to Islam. And so they went to the United States and they were refugees. I was born here, I'm not a refugee. But if they were Palestinians, I'd be a refugee, even though I was born in the United
Hmm.
States. It doesn't make any sense,
Hmm.
but they all want to destroy Israel. And that's why this refugee status is kept alive and why the other Arab states will not grant the Palestinian citizenship. They don't want this problem to be solved except by the destruction of Israel.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's interesting too. A lot of people may not know this, but the term Palestina is a term that we use in Arabic. And what's unique about that term is the first time anybody was ever called a Palestinian, it was around 130 or 150 AD when the Romans actually chose to use that term in order to, for lack of a better term, put down or belittle Jews. It was a term used to refer to Jews because they were referred to as that term because that term denoted their ancient enemies, the Philistines. So it is funny. The very first Palestinians that ever existed were actually Jews, but that's a whole other area. I will tell you this. This is interesting. I have spoken to many Jordanians and Egyptians, obviously, over the years, and one of the reasons why they're very against, they tell me they're very against the idea of Palestinian refugees is because, first of all, it's hard to not translate it from Arabic to English. They say it's bringing a mess their way. But I heard something really interesting, or actually read something really interesting, and it really came alive to me when I read through Hamas's charter, not the revised one, but the one that they originally put together. It's funny, and I know you know this, but they consider any nation that makes peace with Israel to be a traitor. They look at them as enemies of Islam. And of course, we know that's why Sadat was assassinated because of what had happened with Golda and everything after the 73 war. But Jordan is keenly aware of the danger that they have represented by people like Hamas moving into Jordan, as well as Egypt, because of the status that they've obtained with Israel through their peace treaties. Egypt, of course, in 19, I want to say 78, and Jordan in 94. But it is interesting to see that it almost, and I don't want to sound crazy here, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of it is almost as though they don't want that problem in their country. And I know that they're all for the elimination of Jews in the Jewish state, but it seems as though it's a little deeper than that. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're right. I mean, after all, the Palestinians are, to a tremendous degree, jihadis. Many of them are jihadis. And so they're going to wage jihad. Now, Hamas will establish, if it wins, an Islamic State. And so Egypt is not an Islamic state. It's a majority Muslim country. A lot of American non Muslims don't understand this distinction. But the fact is that most of the Muslim countries in the world do not implement full Islamic law. They are not Islamic states in the sense that they establish Islamic law. Hamas and other jihad groups wants to establish Islamic law. So if you have a lot of Palestinians in Egypt, the possibility arises that they will overthrow the Egyptian government and
Hmm.
establish another Muslim Brotherhood state, like there was briefly in Egypt in 2012, that will attempt to implement full Sharia in Egypt. And
Hmm.
it's the same thing. Syria, Jordan, these are not Islamic states. And they don't want to have a bunch of jihadi agitators who are trying to establish an Islamic state in those countries. Kuwait had a very large Palestinian population, and they expelled 300,000 Palestinians in 1990, and this was because they did not want to see the continued agitation of these people for the overthrow of the Kuwaiti government and the establishment of a Sharia government.
Hmm. That's heavy. Okay. Two more things. I don't want to take up your time. Actually, I want to do three things. I want to give you an opportunity to just offer some closing thoughts and tell us how we can get a hold of you and all of that, how people can. I want people, look, we have a lot of people that watch us. I want you to subscribe to Robert's YouTube page, guys. I want you to get familiar with his ministry. I want you to support his ministry. Part of I'm a little selfish here, but part of my reason for asking Robert to come on is I want more people to support him because I want him on for a very long time. I don't, so I'm a
Thank you
little
very much.
selfish there. But I'm going to have you respond to two more videos that I want to play for you. They're very brief, and then after that, we'll open it up to just you giving us some final words. So let me run this one by you, and boy, let me tell you, this one is a doozy. And I will just say, Black Lives Matter is to Black people what Hamas is to Palestinians. That's all I'm going to say with this one. But I want you to watch this and tell me what you think and give me a response here. So let's do that right now. Here it is.
Connections always. The other thing I'll say is Palestine is our generation South Africa. And if we don't step up boldly and courageously to end the imperialist project that's called Israel, we're doomed.
This, by the way, is the founder of Black Lives Matter, Patrice Collars, one of the founders. Um,
Well, Patrice Collars is a Marxist by her own admission, and so it's not surprising that she would be lying to further her goals and that she would want to destroy Israel because Marxists, like Sharia adherent Muslims for that matter, are collectivists. They want everybody to fit into the same cookie cutter and they want to destroy individuality. Marxism is the apex of collectivism. You remember that in communist China, everybody even wore the same clothes at the height of the Mao Zedong regime. And now they've relaxed that a bit and they're not as communists. It's a part of communism to be collectivist and to want to eradicate the individual, make the individual just a cog in the big machine. Why do they hate Israel? Because Israel is the Jewish people. The Jewish people are the unassimilable people who have wandered around the world for 2,000 years and been persecuted in so many countries and never assimilated, never adopted the mores of the wider population. And so they are the uh, foremost enemies of communism, even though it's paradoxical because there's so many leftist Jews. But I think
yeah.
they haven't really thought this through that communism, being collectivist, would eradicate the Jewish people. And so Israel is, of course, sort of an insult to communism as it is to Islam. And that's why Patrice Cullors hates Israel. But also, she's saying it's an apartheid state like South Africa. That's just a criminal lie, really. It's an outrageous lie. In the first place, the Palestinians don't suffer any hardship in Israel. There are Arab Muslims in the Knesset. The head of the largest bank in Israel, Bank Leumi, is a Muslim Arab. There are Muslim Arabs at every stratum of society in Israel. They don't suffer any discrimination or hardship. The Palestinians, from Gaza and Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank, they have to go through checkpoints and things like that. And people point to that and say, see, that's apartheid. No, that's security, man. If you stop heaving rockets into Israel and putting on television that you're going to destroy Israel and kill all the Jews, then the Jews might relax and not have checkpoints to have you come into the country. It's just common sense. But of course, Marxism and other leftist fantasies, they only win by eradicating common sense and lying. And so that's what we get from somebody like Patrisse Cullors.
Yeah. Oh boy, is that true. Okay, that's good. So this is another one. Now, this guy is the Emirates foreign minister, basically. He's the equivalent of the foreign minister. Listen to what he says here. This is interesting. He says something in Arabic initially, then he stops himself and he decides that he wants to speak in English because he wants to be here. And this is interesting when it comes to the Emirates, because there are some really, we're going to do a show on this, by the way. The political ramifications of what a guy like this is doing is pretty unique. So let me play this for you and get your reaction to this one.
أو أنت تتحمل مسؤوليتها. And let me say this in English so you can understand what I'm saying.
I have translation.
No, I know you have translation, but I just want to make sure you get it right. There will come a day that we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and they know Islam and they know the others far better than we do. And I'm sorry, but that's pure ignorance.
Well, very simply, he's speaking to a very common phenomenon that goes back years, and you can find it all across the political spectrum in the United States, that so many non-Muslims, from George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Joe Biden to all their advisors and the people around them, they think they know all about Islam in the Middle East, and they don't know the first foggiest thing. I remember Condoleezza Rice, when she was Secretary of State in the Bush administration, saying the Middle East is still very much riven by the Sunni Shiite conflict, and they're just going to have to give that up. Yeah, for 1,400 years they've been hating each other, and they're going to give it up because the American Secretary of State says so. Yeah, that's going to happen.
The female black Secretary of State for the United States of America.
Yeah, and it's important to note that those two things would make her tremendously disrespected in the Islamic world, so that people would just be ridiculing her no matter what she said. And then when they hear her say that, they ridicule her all the more. And here is the United States of America putting her out as the foremost diplomat and expecting her to be taken seriously. Even if she were saying sensible things, they wouldn't have taken her seriously. But that's not even the point. The point is that she's just like most Americans and thinking, we know, like George W. himself. I'm sorry to be picking on him so much, because there's plenty to be said about people on the other side of the aisle in the United States. But this is not really a partisan problem. And when he said the people in Iraq, they just want, they want the same things that we do. They want freedom. They want justice. They want human rights. And, you know, I thought, and another time he said, we're just fighting for ordinary moms and dads in Iraq. And I thought, no, now he really, in the first place, he should have said ordinary moms and moms and moms and moms and dads. And that would have put the situation into a little bit more perspective. But also, he shows no understanding of the fact that you ask the average Muslim, not even an Islamic authority or some sheikh or something, you ask any Muslim on the street, what does freedom mean? What does justice mean? And their definitions of those words would be very different from George W. Bush's, and would probably involve Islamic law. In which case, George W. would say, well, that ain't freedom or justice. But they would say that what he's pushing is not freedom and justice. And yet no American policymakers have ever taken into account those facts or the teachings of Islam that go against the religion of peace fantasy that prevails in Washington.
That's heavy. That my goodness, my goodness. Okay, I think we've learned a lot. There's been a lot here. My audience has heard one form or another of things that you have said over the years in the videos that I've done. But my goodness, that was fantastic, and I'm just grateful for you being here.
Thank you.
How can people get a hold of you? How can they support you? Where can they go and learn more about all of this stuff? Because there's a lot to learn here.
I appreciate that very much. I'm at jihadwatch.org, and that is, like I said before, the only news site in the world that covers jihad every day. And we've got a Jihad Watch video channel on YouTube. I think that is its name, Jihad Watch Video, if I'm not mistaken. But in any case, you should be able to find it easily enough. It is actually blocked and demonetized. And so we would appreciate it if you like our work and support our work to support us on Patreon. I do a show every Wednesday, although sometimes we're traveling or other things intervene, but most every Wednesday with David Wood, Wednesday night, This Week in Jihad, where we cover the major stories and talk about the reason why these things are happening. That's you'll find on Jihad Watch Video, along with videos of various talks I've given and the media appearances and things like that. Also have 27 books, including the Critical Quran, the History of Jihad that I mentioned before, the Palestinian Delusion, the Truth About Muhammad, which is a biography of the Prophet of Islam, and got a new one coming out next week called The Empire of God, How the Byzantines Saved Civilization. It's a little bit offbeat in that it's not about Islam as such. It's about the Byzantine Empire, a history of the Byzantine Empire. But that is the empire that held out against Islam for 800 years and gave us much of the foundations of Western thought and Western civilization. So that's something you might be interested in. Empire of God, How the Byzantines Saved Civilization. That's available for pre-order now.
That's great. Okay, guys, you got it. And there's a lot of ways to support Robert. Thank you, bro. Thank you for taking time.
Thank you.
You have no idea how much of a blessing that's going to be to our audience. And it's going to be a great time as people just take this in and learn it. And folks, look, I think the best way to close here is to just simply say, we have an obligation to hold fast to the truth, right? That's going to be the thing we stand behind it,
Yes.
because it's the word of God, and that's what we find our peace and our hope in, and it's where those that are tied up in Islam are going to find it, right? It's going to take the so-called religion of peace to the real Prince of Peace, and we only find that in Christ. So thank you, bro. What a blessing. I think we're all very grateful. This has been a great time, a good way to spend a solid hour. Love you, bro. God bless you. And, keep fighting the good fight, man. And boy, in your case, it really is a good fight.
You too.
God bless you.
Thank you. You too.
All right.